Hey everybody, I'm Coach Max, and today I want to talk about a topic that is really near and dear to my heart because of the profound impact it had on me. And I'm sure for other techies and STEM professionals that are watching, it had a profound impact on you. I'm the Authentic Techie. I help techies fix their personal and relationship problems so that they can live lives that are authentic, meaningful, and purpose-driven. So today's topic, the impact of bullying on engineers and STEM professionals is lifelong. And yes, it is lifelong because of the conditioning that happens early on. So if you were bullied, I want you to watch this very carefully because it's going to speak to you. You want to become aware of what symptoms you may have. I'm going to list them all out for you. And if you can relate to this, if these symptoms lined up to things that you have in your life, well, that's the universe telling you, hey, it's time to make a change. It's time to heal that. You don't want to live in an unhealed state. It's actually really painful. Every day you're getting triggered. You're having emotional flashbacks. You have the asshole inner critic judge that's beating you up. It's a terrible way to live. And I've been there. So I totally know where you're coming from. And I want you to know that there is help. There are people that can help you, myself primarily, because I am a techie and I know exactly what you've gone through. And I've done the journey myself. This isn't like a textbook that I've read about something somewhere and then I'm like telling you about it. No. I crawled my way and healed myself from all these symptoms. So glad you're here because this could be life-changing for a lot of you. And let's get right into it. So the impact of bullying is lifelong. Absolutely. The question is, did bullying in the childhood impact your career success and relationships? As Adler would say, every problem we have is a relationship problem. And the short answer is yes. And the long answer, my friend, is yes. It really does. And you're going to find out. So the questions we are asking today. What are the impacts of bullying on the development of our psyche? The conscious and unconscious effects that it had. Remember, our brains, our minds are composed of two parts, the conscious brain and the unconscious brain. So when we were bullied, the bullying had an incredible impact not only on our conscious, what we were aware of, but also the unconscious, stuff that we're not aware of. And once we understand its impact on our psyche, what do we do about it now to heal, right? So we need the cognitive knowledge, awareness of like what the hell happened. And then we have to find out like, what do I do about it now, right? I can't change the past, but what can I do in the present? So a lot of us, when I coach people, I use the word survivor. Because a lot of us have been through very traumatic pasts. When you were a child and you were being bullied, even as a teenager, you really didn't have the cognitive skills or mental processes required to handle that. It's like a little war zone, especially if you're like really young. It's a war zone. You know, we think about like soldiers going into war. Well, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old going to class and getting bullied is at the same level of cognitive disruption as an adult going into war. We're in a heightened state. We're triggered. We're in a fight or flight response. And yeah, that is a terrifying thing for a young mind to handle. So why survivor? You didn't have the cognitive skills to differentiate what is yours and what is theirs since it wasn't taught to you. Even if you could thwart it at the cognitive level, your unconscious mind would still absorb the messaging as it was pervasive and unavoidable. The conscious mind, you could have, like, let's say you have a guru child that can truly differentiate, hey, mom, that's your problem. Why don't you go to find some therapy? I'm sure you can work out your traumas and you'd be better off. If such a child existed, even though consciously he can block the bullying that is happening by their parent or their children, his unconscious mind would still be absorbing the messaging. The messaging would still be very pervasive. And the unconscious mind doesn't care what the conscious mind is thinking. It is always absorbing and judging. So if you're at the bottom and you're getting beat up, it's going to start drawing conclusions about that. And these conclusions lead to negative core beliefs, which are largely out of your conscious mind. Now, unfortunately, for most people, it was conscious and unconscious. But for a lot of us, if we have like this guru child, he would have still gotten this stuff built into him because the unconscious, you can't fake it out. The negative core beliefs would have been established. These negative core beliefs here's some examples. I'm unlovable. People don't like me. I'm a loser. I will never amount to anything. Nothing good ever happens to me, right? So if you're being beat up at the bus every day after when you're going back to work, which going from school, which is what I had to deal with all the time, my young mind would have been at some level saying, I'm a loser. I don't amount to anything. Nothing good is ever going to happen. Look at what is around me. Yes, the conscious mind could be like, oh, F yourself. But the unconscious mind is like, fuck, why is this even happening? There's something wrong with us. Another example, I am incompetent. I am broken. I'm a fraud imposter. I don't do anything right. Those core beliefs would then translate into, this is the way the mind works, into feelings, which feelings would then turn to repetitive, intrusive thoughts. Then stories lead to rules, and rules lead to actions. The intrusive thoughts, when they're kicking around your brain needs to make sense of them. It needs to find a framework by which it can integrate them. So it's going to create a lot of stories about reality. You're going to create your own little reality tunnel, your own little world, which embodies all these things that you've been experiencing. So if you've been experiencing a lot of pain and people beating you up and you've internalized some of these core thoughts, you're going to have stories that are keeping those thoughts going. Why wouldn't this happen to me? Exactly, it's going to happen to me. The world is a very dangerous place. So you've created from the negative core belief that I'm damaged, that nobody likes me, that there's something wrong. I will create stories around that to reinforce those. Here's my little thing, how I see the development of the psyche. You have the authentic, healthy self at the bottom. This is your innate, loving, compassionate, healed self. Due to bullying or a really shitty upbringing, you get conditioned and you create a filter by which you see the world. I would call this a trauma filter. This lens, which should be clear, gets all fogged up and distorts your authentic self, and then it creates, instead of just being at peace and loving, you're hypervigilant, you're hypersensitive, your hair trigger fight or flight response, you're always scanning for the next shoe to drop, right? So that's really creating compulsive anxiety and depressive-like symptoms. Really, and then those, you're taking actions based on this worldview that you've created, that it was put upon you. Of course, your actions aren't going to be really lined up. You might turn to substances or all kinds of coping mechanisms to try to push down all the thoughts and negative feelings. The good news is, as the trauma filter gets healed, as you do the work, you really start looking at, you become aware and start doing the work to heal these traumas, that filter clears up and you will no longer have intrusive thoughts and shitty feelings. You'll start feeling better about yourself. But it's important at this stage that we become aware of what exactly is happening and that the filter, which is dirty, that has been corrupted by other people when we were young, that we were survivors of, can be cleared up. We didn't program it in. We didn't want to be bullied. But now we have a chance to clear that up and change our lives. That responsibility as adults is on us. You must take decisive action to start chipping away at that. Because you can have all the career success in the world. You can achieve everything you've ever achieved. You can be a billionaire. But all that core conditioning does not just magically go away. There's no point at which it just goes away by itself. It actually gets carried on. If anything, it gets worse. So keep that in mind. We have to take decisive action to heal the conditioning in the trauma filter. Okay, here's a little diagram for the unconscious and conscious mind. The conscious mind, everything you think is yourself, is actually a tiny, tiny piece. The subconscious mind, the unconscious, is actually most of your thoughts, most of your worldview, and embodies so much of yourself. And remember, that was conditioned when you were before 7. So think about the impact of bullying on a child and on the unconscious. It's really profound. So traumas, unconscious has traumas, violence, guilt and shame, inner critic, right? You're beating yourself up. Well, that comes from the unconscious. Repressed experiences, repressed desires, right? So if I get beat up all the time, my innate loving nature of how I connect to the world is being returned back to me as violence. So of course, I'm not going to let my authentic self come out because it was terrifying to do so. When I tried it as a child, I got beat up. I got yelled at. I got shamed. So you're going to repress your experiences. You're going to repress your desires. You're going to repress parts of yourself. and shove those away. And then you're going to conform to whatever the society does. So the impact on the psyche of trauma, of bullying, is profound. Okay, so your personal beliefs, cultural beliefs, projections, self-identity, you can go on and on. You can see that the unconscious is most of it. The conscious, the little power that it has willpower, plans, actions, goals. But remember, it's also heavily influenced by all the unconscious stuff. So even though you may have a little control, it's still going through that filter and being warped and distorted, right? So your planning, your decision-making might not be very good, right? You might be very frazzled, can't really concentrate. Well, why couldn't you concentrate? Because when you were young, you were on vigilant alert for real fears and dangers that were all around you. You were like prey in a lion's den of all these bullies. And that's going to create a repetition compulsion, a pattern in your life where you are always hypervigilant and you won't be able to concentrate. How much time do I have? Okay. Now, we're going to go into the symptoms and what to do about everything. But before we do, please subscribe. This is life-changing stuff. And there isn't a lot of resources out there for techies. That's exactly why this channel, I created it. Because traditional therapy and a lot of the stuff that's going on doesn't really address some of these core issues. That's why I think this channel is so important. So if this really resonates with you, if you do want to start the healing journey, if these symptoms actually correlate and your spirit wants to, please like and subscribe. I'm going to do a weekly video on healing and what that looks like. So don't pass up this opportunity. Click and like, subscribe, change the bell, do everything you need to do because this is life-changing stuff. Okay, so the impacts of bullying, I'm going to look at symptoms. I've looked up some research on this. I'm going to just highlight some of the things that are interesting to me. I'm going to post the links to the articles and the books if you are interested in further deep diving. But this is 2,300 students in middle school. And bullying, here's some of the impacts, right? Poor academic performance, social isolation, feelings of shame, sleep disturbances, low self-esteem, school avoidance, symptoms of anxiety, bedwetting, higher risk of illness, right? Your body starts to break down because you're always triggered. You're always in a war zone. So you have all these stress chemicals while you're trying to develop, right? So the person who actually has to go through this as a child is going to be developmentally stunted because the person that didn't have that was able to have a healthy environment by which his body grew. But we had all these stress hormones going through our body. Of course, we're not going to develop as quickly or as healthy as we should. Bedwetting, of course, symptoms of depression and psychosomatic illness. The mind is so much stressed, eventually it's going to break down the body, right? Somatic illnesses, sore throats, coughs and colds. I was always sick as a child. Surprise, surprise, right? Poor appetite, headaches, sleep disturbances, abdominal pains. Our minds and our stomachs are basically one nervous system. So IBS type symptoms, yeah, very common. Musculoskeletal pain, which is often psychosomatically induced, where the body starts to break down, muscles start to tense up. You might have repetitive stress injuries, all kinds of stuff in later life. Dizziness, fatigue, greater medication use, right? Because nobody knows how to treat this, right? We think it's a medical problem. Oh, look, he's having a lot of symptoms. But we don't realize that most of our symptoms physically are psychologically based. And I know this from being on the other side. I used to be very sickly. I used to get sick all the time. But now that I've done the healing work, I rarely get sick. And I'm very healthy. So it's actually night and day difference. I didn't take any medication. I didn't even see a doctor. All I did was heal the traumas that bullying had caused within me. Bullying wasn't the only thing, but it was a big contributor. Some more relevant studies on the impact. Nearly 5 times higher odds of becoming depressed 2 years later if you've been bullied. Bullying is a significant predictor of depression. Up to 7 years after, bullied children were roughly twice as likely to be depressed in adult life. Twice as likely as non-bullied children to experience psychosomatic problems during their school years. The effects of bullying are lifelong. It doesn't just go away. It will make you more prone to depression, anxiety, all kinds of psychosomatic illness when you get older. Yes, it does. And the reason why is because, like I said earlier, there's really no place in the maturation of the body where all of a sudden, all your traumatic experiences go away magically. Like you hit 18 and it goes away. It doesn't do that. Our early programming, the firmware of our minds, just keeps compounding. We start gathering evidence why we are not successful, why we are sick, why we don't deserve anything. And that gets stronger and stronger compulsively until you really shut down. You have a failure to thrive, right? Unless you do the healing work, none of this is going to get fixed. As the bullied person realizes this environment is dangerous, they're going to disconnect socially. And unfortunately, we are a social creature. So once we disconnect socially, we're actually really limiting all our growth, all our development, all of our maturity. Everything just goes to hell, and we're not going to really be able to lead successful lives. So as the slide says, lower ability to understand emotions of others, poor social understandings and emotional skills, less likely to have a best friend, poor peer relationships, more peer rejection. Imagine going to work and having all these core beliefs going on, right? Like you didn't get a chance to develop healthy relationships, and now you have to develop healthy relationships with your boss, with your workers. You know, you got a network. How are you going to do that? Who taught you that? The only thing you were taught was, oh my gosh, everything's unsafe. And it was unsafe. You were a survivor. You have to have a lot of compassion with yourself because this stuff really sucks. And once you start diving into it, you realize, man, this thing had a profound impact on me, and I wasn't aware of it. Antisocial behavior, you'll become more reclusive. Aggression, because you're hypersensitive, because you have these open wounds in the psyche, any little thing will just trigger you. You might go fight, fawn, flight, freeze. All the ways the nervous system gets triggered, well, you're getting that all the time, right? Poor adult intimate relationships, insecure attachment. You will no longer be able to have healthy relationships because you'll fall into the avoidant, which is a closed down mental state in relationships, a fear of intimacy, or anxious, where you have a fear of abandonment, so you're always very clingy. None of those are your true state. Those are trauma responses that bullying at an insecure home would have created. And of course, anticipation of failure. Imagine going to work thinking you're an imposter and it's not going to work out for you. All these things are trauma-based. They were conditioned into you, but we can heal them. So in summary, we are a combination of many formative experiences that created the level of mental health we have today. So take a minute to really examine where you lie today. If you are anxious and very sad and have these kind of symptoms, you for sure had a traumatic experience. You have trauma that needs to be fixed. This stuff doesn't come out of nowhere. And this stuff is not intrinsically you. This stuff was programmed in, conditioned in, like you would condition a neural network by training it in the young age. But the good news is that we can change. So we've talked about children, what the data shows for children, but what about when they move into adulthood? Well, it doesn't get any better. Emotional flashbacks, tyrannical inner and outer critic, so you're shaming yourself and then you're shaming others. Toxic shame, self-abandonment, social anxiety, you can't connect with other people, abject feelings of loneliness and abandonment. You don't have these relationships that are really nurturing, so you're going to feel lonely. Fragile self-esteem, attachment disorder, developmental arrest, relationship difficulties, radical mood vacillations, disassociation via distracting activities or mental processes. Yeah, we play a lot of video games. It's very normal for techies. We get lost in our heads in hobbies, or in our work, right? Some people are just workaholics. Well, what's happening there? There, you're just trying to disassociate in a societally approved way, but you're still disassociating. You're not still grounded, having the self-love flowing in your body and feeling in a good state, in a peaceful state. You're having unconscious or conscious feelings of anxiety and depression and finding a way to push those things down by career attainment, working all day, hiding out in the office, playing video games all day, being numb, being disassociated, just vegging out, maybe smoking weed, drinking, partying. I mean, the list goes on and on. All those things are not intrinsically bad. You can party, you can have fun, but when they're used as a tool to push down repressed emotions that were never dealt with, then you got a problem, because you're in a vicious cycle that just keeps getting worse as you compulsively re-injure yourself through these activities. Oversensitivity to stressful situations. It's the constant vigilance, right? From constant vigilance, I'm creating all these boogeyman where none exist. Had I been grounded and still and at peace, I wouldn't have these I wouldn't say delusions, but they border on delusions of all the insecurities in the world, right? We get paranoid. It's like mini paranoia. And I was there, so I totally know it. I was like, when I was coaching, I was like, man, I have a little paranoia. And it's true. And I was very compassionate and loving to myself, because I realized, man, all that stuff was not my true self. It was conditioning. And luckily I did the work and got better. So a little deep dive is, like we just talked about, the scanning the environment for perceived threats all the time. Hypervigilance, hyperadrenalization in normal situations. That's why social anxiety happens, because you get into a state of humans with other humans, and all of a sudden you're freaking out. You're imagining things that don't actually exist, but did exist when you were young. So it's totally natural, right? It's totally normal why you would think this way. You get an idea, a compulsive thinking of all the ways people can hurt you while going about your everyday business and strategizing how you would mitigate and escape. I'm not okay. You're not okay. Let me put up walls and barriers and strategize so that we can all kind of keep this thing going without it all falling apart, right? It turns into a mild paranoia, as I talked about. You're watching your back all the time syndrome, because your reticular activation system, the part of your brain that's always on lookout, is super heightened. I put some examples here because these are just kind of examples that I was like really paranoid everywhere I went, doing all kinds of stuff. So even simple stuff like, I want to buy this phone, but what happens if I give him the phone and he turns around and runs away with my money, right? So I was like, even like a simple transaction turned into like a very anxiety-provoking event. When I'm walking around in a tourist area with luggage, I'm going to get robbed. I need to hide everything to make sure that the cleaners won't steal my laptop. I don't know why I put cleaners there. But even when I put stuff like going to laundry, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what if they steal a shirt or something? You know, I was always like, these days, I just allow it, you know. There's only I'm not going to spend my time trying to like protect everything. At some point, there is intrinsic, people might steal stuff, and that's okay. If they steal it, they probably need it more than I do. And I don't have this level of heightened hypersensitivity that I used to where I thought everybody was a threat to me. So the impacts are profound, but don't sweat it, because you can change and you can heal and become your true authentic self. It is a wonderful process. And when you get through the other side, you'll be able to help others on their journey, just like I have. Like I went through the journey, now help others. And your journey will be a pivotal, important part of your life that you will use for good. I truly believe that everyone that goes through this stuff becomes a better person. You will become more loving, you'll become more helpful, you'll become more compassionate, because you know what it's like. And that is something that people that have not gone through this will never understand. So in the end, you will be doing good. Okay, so now we've come to the healing part. And this is important because we become aware of what's going on here. We've identified the problem. Now we need to heal. Healing is a multi-step process. It doesn't happen linearly. I work with people all the time. It's a long process. I talk with them every week. I make sure that they're going through, that they're taking emotionally risky action and starting to change the programming, the firmware in our brains, so that we can, over time, start shifting our mindsets so we're not hypervigilant, we're not getting triggered all the time. So, basics of healing, an overview. Become aware. Awareness is everything. So before this video, you may have just been bullied. I got over it. Now you realize, man, I have IBS symptoms. Man, I have a lot of stress. Where did that come from? So the awareness is coming, right? Step 2, decide that it's within your power to change. Take 100% responsibility for making the shift. Anything less will drag you into victim mentality and keep you stuck. Do whatever it takes to change. It requires a level of commitment to change, since it is so entrenched in the unconscious and has walls and fortifications of fear around it. Taking responsibility for the healing process is 100% what you needed to do. That means no more playing victim, no more cajoling, manipulating anything in your life. Whatever's happening in your life is meant to be there, and you're going to take the opportunity to use those to really change by taking 100% responsibility. If I'm in a shitty situation, I put myself there. Why did I put myself there? Oh, because I was compulsively fawning, right? Codependency, people pleasing. Well, now I get to heal that people pleasing. So it doesn't matter what they're doing. It matters how I'm responding. So when you take 100% responsibility, man, that is so empowering, because it's like, all this crap got me here, and now I'm getting myself out. I don't need anybody else's help. I don't need anybody else to change. The only person that's going to change is myself. And that is incredibly empowering. So as I tell all my people, take 100% responsibility. And the ego says, no, no. But as soon as they do, man, it really changes things a lot, because it empowers you. Once you know the ball's in your court, you can do whatever you want with the ball. You can play, you can loop it up, you can jump shot, you have the power. As soon as you're waiting around for someone else to change, it's not going to happen. Realize that your unconscious just has some bad programming. You were a victim in childhood of neglect, but as a result, you are empowered and capable of deciding to change. So that was like the grand principle. Now let's look at the general solution. Learn to manage your emotional flashbacks. People that come to me are flashing back all the time. They just don't even realize it. They're being triggered. Their triggers actually trigger themselves even further. They cascade trigger. It's like a recursive algorithm that just gets worse. So their whole life is a whole series of emotional flashbacks. So we have to become aware of those and start to managing them, start to process them. Work on your inner critic shaming and guilting, right? So if you were bullied and you were told you were a piece of shit, your own conscience is going to be like, I'm a piece of shit. Even though your conscience could be like, I'm not, your own conscience is what we're working with. It's going to start beating yourself up. You can't do this. You're a failure. The same things your parents told you, you'll be repeating to yourself. And we want to cut that crap out. That part is not part of us. It's just a trauma response. And we start to work on it right away. Work on your outer critic disassociation. Judging people is not self-love. We beat up ourselves. We're emotional flashbacking. We're emotionally flashbacking and being triggered all the time. We project that out onto other people. We become the judge and juror of the world, right? We start dividing things. We keep ourselves occupied, disassociated from the pain inside by getting mixed up in the world. And the world gives you a million opportunities to disassociate with it. And there's no end of stuff that you can go down the rabbit hole with. But as part of the process, we're not doing that anymore. And it's nervous. We're not used to it. So there's a process to start letting go of all that. Start letting go of the shaming. Start letting go of the judgment on the exterior world. Learn to regulate your nervous system and self-soothe. This is a big one, because your nervous system goes into fight or flight mode all the time when you have a lot of trauma. And now you have to learn to bring it down a notch. Take a deep breath. Just get in your body. Start feeling these emotions. It's a process. It's like learning a new language. You have to learn it slowly and through the fire, really, through trials, right? So, your coworker might trigger you to hell and cause all these acting out, but now you have to, sit through it and work through the process. It's hard, but it happens. And each time you overcome a little bit, with a long period of time, as you set your intent and work through it, you start to heal. Start taking emotionally risky action in the direction that is healthy, and start reconditioning your mind via emotion and repetition over a long period of time. That's kind of what I was just talking about with the coworker. You have to start taking emotionally risky action, doing things that are not your normal pattern. And the mind uses fear to control you, to keep you in your same pattern. So as soon as you do a pattern interrupt, holy shit, you get triggered, right? So you got to realize that that's just part of the healing process and start allowing that. Start taking emotionally risky action in different directions and sitting with the uncomfortable feelings. You might have a ton of guilt and shame when you stop rescuing everybody in your life. You have to process that deep guilt and shame. That is liberation. Then when that is actually healed, when you're no longer feeling guilty and responsible for other people, other sovereign adults which you have no responsibility for, you start to free yourself. You start to feel good. It's really quite amazing. Allow the grieving process. If you've been bullied, you have a lot of pain down there. You may not have been aware of it, but as you start connecting to yourself and avoiding the disassociation by external activities, you're going to start being sad. What actually happened? Holy shit, did I lose a lot of my life because of trauma? Where were people to help me when I was 6? Where were my parents? Why didn't they love me? Why was nobody out there looking for me? I was a 6-year-old. What the hell? Right? There's anger. And then there's sadness. Part of healing is really digging into that sadness. I remember crying for days, man. That was intense. But that pain was down there and it had to be processed. So grieving is what actually heals you. Of all the things I do, if someone actually grieves, I know that they're going to heal. And from healing is going to be awakening, and the joy in their heart is going to be expanded. Grieving teaches us self-compassion, teaches us to love ourselves. It's in the grief that we learn what love for the self is. I'll talk about this more, but grieving is an important one. Finally, seek out help if it's negatively impacting your life. This takes courage. You have to realize the patterns and your decisions that have brought you to here have been so trauma-filled that you don't really have the way out just yet, and you need a guide. And I was lucky to have found a guide, my coach, who I still coach with years later, because I couldn't see what was going on. I didn't have the awareness. I needed someone who had walked through it themselves. And I found someone who had walked through it, and she could tell me, hey, watch out for that. And there were times, I swear, she would tell me something and explain what was going on that had she not told me, I would have spent the rest of my life down the rabbit hole. I kid you not. There were days in our sessions with her, my sessions with her, that she really unstuck me and saved me from just ruminating on the wrong thing. So I think if we have a lot of trauma, if this really resonates with you, the best thing you could do is have the courage to seek help. Go to the AuthenticTechie.com, check me out, sign up for a discovery session. It's free, and I can learn a little bit about yourself, and we can see if we're a good fit. Nothing short of drastic action is going to break these patterns. So don't be afraid, have the courage to take decisive action and change your life. So that wraps up my presentation on bullying. I want to thank you so much for being with me and listening to this. I know it's important. I know this stuff, we'd rather not look at it, but it constitutes our core negative beliefs by which we create our reality. And if this resonates with you, this is a beautiful sign. Don't be sad. Realize that, man, it's the universe, God, is bringing you to this, making this aware. You don't want to live another day with all these symptoms. You really don't. You want to heal them and see your life transform and make the best of it. Not only in your relationships, in your work careers, but in your relationships and everything around you. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me today. And please click like and subscribe, because there's going to be more awesome content that is life transformative. Thank you.